Currently, the CONCACAF Gold Cup is the region's major tournament, and it officially began in 1991 and has been held every other year, minus 2 times. Once where it was held 3 years after the prior one, and once where it happened back to back. So in the inaugural CONCACAF Gold Cup in 1991, the USA hosted the tournament. It would be joined by Canada and Mexico, who got automatic qualification. Jamaica joined after winning the 1991 Caribbean Cup, and Trinidad and Tobago qualified after ended in second place of that tournament. Costa Rica qualified because they won the last CONCACAF championship, and Honduras qualified for ending in second place of the 1991 UNCAF Nations Cup, and Guatemala ended up in third, so they qualified as well. First place was Costa Rica, but since they were already qualified, they give it to whoever was in third place. The teams were divided into 2 groups of 4, in which the top 2 of each group would go on to the knockout phase. In the knockout phase, Honduras would face Costa Rica and the US would face Mexico. Honduras and the USA would win their matches and face off in the final, in which the US would win the inaugural tournament after defeating Honduras in a penalty shootout. The 1993 edition was hosted by Mexico and the US, and since Canada, the US, and Mexico would continue to get automatic qualification until recent history, I'm just going to call them the North Zone because I don't want to consistently be saying their names over and over again when they're clearly automatically qualified. So, from the other zones, Martinique and Jamaica qualified through the 1993 Caribbean Cup, ending in first and second respectively, while Honduras, Costa Rica, and Panama would qualify through the 1993 UNCAF Nations Cup, ending in first, second, and third respectively. The semifinals would end up being Costa Rica versus the US and Mexico versus Jamaica. The final would then end up being the first of many Mexico versus the US matchups. In this edition, Mexico would end up coming out as champion after defeating the US in the final match. The 1996 edition was hosted by the US. The North Zone had automatic qualification. Trinidad and Tobago and St. Vincent and the Grenadines would qualify through the 1995 Caribbean Cup, while Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador qualified through the 1995 UNCAF Nations Cup. Lastly, Brazil was invited for some reason. The tournament was separated into 3 groups of 3. Winner of each group had the best second place would go to the semifinals. In the semis, Brazil beat the US and Mexico beat Guatemala. And in the final, Mexico beat Brazil with a 2-0 score to claim their second championship. I don't know why I ended that The 1998 edition was hosted by the USA. The North Zone qualified automatically, but Canada pulled out before the tournament started. Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Cuba qualified via the 1997 Caribbean Cup, while Costa Rica, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras qualified via the 1997 UNCAF Nations Cup. Brazil was once again invited. The tournament had 1 group of 4 and 2 groups of 3. In the semifinals, Mexico would beat Jamaica, and the US got revenge over Brazil. Mexico then defeated the US once again, 1-0 in the final. The 2000 edition was hosted by the US. The North Zone qualified automatically. Jamaica qualified via the 1998 Caribbean Cup, while Trinidad, Tobago, and Haiti qualified via the 1999 Caribbean Cup. Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Honduras qualified via the 1999 UNCAF Nations Cup. Colombia and Peru were invited for, again, some reason, and South Korea was invited, most likely due to the fact that it was going to host the 2002 World Cup. The tournament had 4 groups of 3, where the top 2 of each group would go to the quarterfinals. In it, Colombia beat the US, and Peru beat Honduras. Trinidad and Tobago would beat Costa Rica, and Canada would beat Mexico. In the semifinals, Colombia beat Peru, and Canada beat Trinidad and Tobago. And in the final, Canada beat Colombia to achieve its first and so far only Gold Cup title. The 2002 edition was hosted by the US. The North Zone qualified automatically. Trinidad and Tobago, Haiti, Martinique, and Cuba qualified via the 2001 Caribbean Cup. Guatemala, Costa Rica, and El Salvador qualified via the 2001 CONCACAF Nations Cup. Ecuador was invited, for some reason, and South Korea was invited once again, most likely due to the fact that they were months away from hosting the 2002 World Cup. The tournament had 4 groups of 3. In the quarterfinals, Costa Rica beat Haiti, South Korea beat Mexico, Canada beat Martinique, and the US beat El Salvador. In the semis, Costa Rica beat South Korea, while the US beat Canada. And finally, the US would beat Costa Rica to win its second Gold Cup. The 2003 edition was hosted by the US and Mexico. The North Zone had automatic qualification. Cuba, Jamaica, and Martinique qualified through a qualifying tournament as there was no Caribbean Cup held. Costa Rica, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras all qualified through the 2003 CONCACAF Nations Cup. Lastly, the World Cup champions Brazil, alongside Colombia, were invited to participate. The tournament was divided into 4 groups of 3. Top 2 of each group advanced to the quarterfinals. In it, Mexico would beat Jamaica and Costa Rica would beat El Salvador. The United States would beat Cuba and Brazil would beat Colombia. Then in the semifinals, Mexico would beat Costa Rica, while the US would fall yet again to Brazil. And in the final, Mexico would triumph over Brazil yet again to achieve the Gold Cup championship. The 2005 edition was hosted by the US. The North Zone qualified automatically. Jamaica, Cuba, and Trinidad and Tobago qualified via the 2005 Caribbean Cup. Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, and Panama qualified via the 2005 CONCACAF Nations Cup. Colombia and South America, I want to publicly apologize to South Africa because I don't know what I was on. And the thing is that I constantly do that, like, outside of it. I don't understand. Who was recently selected to host the 2010 World Cup were the 2 invitees. This was also the last time until the 2021 edition that the Gold Cup would have a team from outside of CONCACAF. The tournament had 3 groups of 4 and 1 group of 3. The top 2 of each group would go on to the quarterfinals. In it, Honduras would beat Costa Rica, the US would beat Jamaica, Colombia would beat Mexico, and Panama would beat South Africa. In the semis, the US would beat Honduras and Panama would beat Colombia. And in the final, the US would come out on top and win the Gold Cup. Since this is the halfway point, I'm going to stop here and continue the last 8 editions in the next video. That way this video doesn't end up being over 10 minutes and it doesn't require too much editing from my part. So, peace.